What Really Happened with your host, Mike Rivero. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show. It is Monday, June 6th, 2011 here, start of a brand new week. And we're launching here into Rent's radio show here. Brett is in the control room. Our phone lines are open, 877-342-6673. 877-342-6673. Got a lot of stuff to talk about here today. First of all, the big headline, you probably heard this on the news break. Yes, that was Wiener's Wiener on those text messages. Representative Anthony Weiner has basically admitted, yeah, he's been sending naked and semi-naked pictures of himself to women. Apparently, this has been kind of an ongoing thing. He lied about it being a hacking attack. And apparently ABC located a woman that Representative Weiner had been sending, very questionable sexual imagery and text to for quite some time. And she's now come forward and gone public. So Anthony Weiner has basically come out and admitted what he did wrong and said he's sort of sorry, but not sorry enough to resign. Actually, he's kind of in the same position that George Washington was in when his father caught him standing next to a dead cherry tree, and George is holding the axe in his hand, and George is saying, well, I cannot tell a lie, so I guess I have to tell the truth now. And that's basically what happened here. Now, just to sort of get on an equal opportunity bashing and ridiculing and humiliating situation, Sarah Palin is continuing to make some rather amazing commentary that just impresses people with how incredibly dense and ill-informed she really is. And I'm going to start off here with this little comment that we got from her on the radio.
Obviously, got to stand with our North Korean allies. We're bound to by treaty. We're also bound by, yeah.
Sarah Palin doesn't even remember which is supposed to be our friend and which is supposed to be our enemy among the Koreas. She's just out there spouting the buzzwords. Now, some of the things that she has been caught saying, the one that really kind of sort of underscores this whole thing, she came out with this statement. It's on video. It's all over the web. It went viral about how Paul Revere's ride was to warn the British to basically say, don't take away our arms and don't do whatever. And she got it completely wrong. I mean, Paul Revere's ride. By the way, there were 3 riders, of which only one, William Dawes, actually completed the ride. Revere himself got arrested by the British partway through. And only because Longfellow couldn't come up with a really good rhyme for Dawes is why Paul Revere got the nod. Plus, Paul Revere had a really good public relations department. But the point is, the ride was there to warn the Patriot troops of the approach of the British, not to warn the British. And so Sarah Palin put her hoof in her mouth very much like that. Other things she said, she claimed Sputnik bankrupted the Soviet Union. Yes, they were first into space, but it bankrupted them. Actually, Afghanistan broke them. Responding to Star Wars broke them. Sputnik launched a major technological revolution in the Soviet Union, much as America's space program did here, leading to the glory 1980s and high-tech revolutions. So she got that completely wrong. Sputnik stimulated the Russian economy, just like Mercury and Gemini and Apollo stimulated America's economy. It was war that bankrupted the Soviet Union, just like it's war bankrupting the United States of America again. Sarah Palin, the wonder from Wasilla, was out there saying that the vice president runs the Senate. And that's absolutely wrong. His title may be President of the United States Senate, but according to the Constitution, the vice president doesn't do anything except cast a vote in the event of a tie. So far, Joe Biden has done that 0 times. Other than that, the vice president has no authority over the Senate whatsoever. John Adams called it the most boring possible job one could have in the government, to be vice president and president of the Senate. So Sarah Palin has, and remember, when she said it, Sarah Palin was running for the job of vice president. And she was thinking she was going to get to run the Senate and tell them what to do. And that is absolutely not what happens. Sarah Palin was going on and about how the founding fathers were saying the Pledge of Allegiance, and that, under God was good enough for them and it should be good enough for us. And, of course, that's completely nonsense, because the Pledge of Allegiance didn't come into being until 1892. And under God wasn't added until 1954. And I bring this up, and I bring up this story about Anthony Weiner because there's a rather interesting video linked to whatreallyhappened.com where Ron Paul is out there saying the government represents the people of the United States of America, and that is more than simply representing our wishes within government. These are supposed to be the best of the best. The rest of the world looks at our government and says, these individuals, these senators, these representatives, these governors, these political aspirants are supposed to represent the best of what America can be. And we've got Weiner texting his wiener all over the Internet, and Sarah Palin, who absolutely does not understand what the job of vice president is. And this is the best the political system can do? Or more to the point, the people who fund political campaigns and choose the candidates think you're okay with these kind of people, because we keep getting these kind of perverts and ignorant morons. Yes, I will grant you Sarah Palin looked really good in a bathing suit, past tense. But that's not a qualification for public office in my mind. I know, over in Italy they elected a porn star to the parliament over there. What was her name? Cicciolina. But we're not Italy. And I don't think we should be electing bathing beauties, beauty contestant swimsuit queens, with no knowledge whatsoever about government. I don't think we should be allowing them into the political process. And the issue here is what is going on behind the scenes in our political process. What kind of filters are in place? Where total morons and sex perverts seem to be the only ones getting through to run for office. Sarah Palin is a joke, and the rest of the world are laughing at her, and yet our corporate media continues to promote her like she should be seriously considered for high office in this country. And that is just flat out wrong. The only qualification she has for high office is she's starting to wear the Star of David around her neck everywhere she goes. And she had the flag of Israel in her governor's office in Alaska. And we don't know what is behind this lady that represents her power. When she was mayor of Wasilla, she was so bad at her job, the town had to hire a professional town manager to basically do the mayor's job for her while she went out and around and looked pretty and did all the various social ritual functions of the job. And yet we're being told this represents the best of what our political system can come up to. And I think that's an insult. I think that's an insult to every single America, to have people who behave in this manner, who are this uneducated, offered up as candidates. I remember the big stink when Bill Clinton was out there talking about a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, and he was saying that's, in the Declaration of Independence, and that's what it says in the Constitution. And, of course, he was completely wrong. That's Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. And he was the president, and he didn't know where that quote came from. What is it about our political system that people who are not qualified for these jobs are being presented as the top candidates from which we must make a selection? There's something going on here. Maybe it's that water in Washington, D.C. A lot of those old buildings still have those antique lead pipes. Maybe it's lead poisoning. Maybe it's swamp gas. I mean, they built the nation's capital in an old malarial swamp. Very appropriate, I think. But there's something going on when you have this kind of behavior. I mean, most people don't know this. The United States Capitol has a budget allowance every year for buying off congressional pages who are molested and abused by members of Congress. It's literally a line item in the budget. We have so many $100,000 set aside, and every time a page complains, they get a check and sent back home. It's an expected business expense of running the nation's capital. Can't we do better than this? Can we not do better for leaders than this? That's what I want to know. Anyway, my goodness. Now, I put up an article today headlined Rich versus Poor, a Study in Contrasts. And I want you to go to whatreallyhappened.com and take a look at it, because it's just side by side 2 stories regarding hit-and-run accidents and the difference in punishments handed out to these 2 individuals. The difference between them, one was a very rich person, and the other was not. And you need to go read what happened to them, because the rich guy driving a Porsche got house arrest in a luxury oceanfront condo, and the not rich guy gets 9 years in prison for exactly the same crime. That blindfold on the lady with the scales, I think there's a hole in that, because justice is not blind in the United States of Ameristan here. We're going to take a break. Join us on the air, 877-342-6673. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, with all the stuff that's going on, you know, the jobless rate is going up. We're basically in the greatest depression in American history. We've gone past the last Great Depression. This is now the new Great Depression. And not surprisingly, a new Newsweek poll is finding that Americans are mad about pretty much everything. There isn't anything Americans are happy about. In fact, even God only got a 33% approval rating. So, it's kind of frustrating when you realize the government just doesn't seem to really care, and the media doesn't seem to want to pay attention. They're all caught up in this wanting to just go on assuring us that everything is just fine and hunky-dory. And I was looking at this other story where we're talking about the U.S. push for war, and its current policies are literally driving the U.S. economy off the edge of the abyss. And the story was commenting about how as the negotiations are going on for raising the debt ceiling, you have the Democrats insisting they will not allow an increase to the debt ceiling until the Republicans allow more taxes, and the Republicans are screaming they will not allow the debt ceiling to be raised until the Democrats are willing to cut more social programs. And behind it all, of course, is this realization that all of America's money is going into the wars and the Wall Street bailouts and all over Israel, and every time they talk about cutting, it's always the things that we, the American people, actually pay taxes for, like good roads, good bridges, good schools, good hospital, a good quality of life, and an infrastructure that supports commerce and manufacturing. And it seems like the government is taking our money and spending it on everything except us. And I have a little slogan I've put together. I'm going to put it on a T-shirt over at our little store here, and it basically says, when I choose to live on less, that's austerity. When the government makes me live on less, that's poverty. And that's where we are right now. And what we've come down to is the reality that we are already in the Third World War. Future history is going to look back and say, yeah, they were in it, well and truly. The United States has been in Afghanistan longer than we were in World War II. We've invaded we don't even know how many countries we've got soldiers in, because the U.S. government lies about where we are. Al Jazeera says there are already Americans and British on the ground in Libya, getting that gosh darn Gaddafi for threatening to sue Goldman Sachs for losing 98% of their money. But we're already into the war. And looking around, we're in a wartime economy. We're all being asked to make do with less so the war machine can have more, and we are losing. The reason I was opposed to all of these wars, Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Yemen, Somalia, wherever we're in, all of these wars, is because we don't have the resources that we had during World War II. We don't have the factories. We've given our manufacturing away. Those factories all rusted hulks, the machinery in them, if it has not been stripped and sold off to other countries, it's all rusted and corroded. You can't just walk in, flip on the switch, and go back to work. We've been losing our manufacturing for 30 years. It'll take 30 years to get it back. We don't have the economy to support a major war. And despite the U.S. government handing out green cards like Cracker Jacks prizes, we don't have enough boots on the ground. And what is going on, and this is the part that is really, really sick, is Washington, D.C. and Wall Street cannot admit to themselves they've made this bad a mistake. They're convinced that if they can get into a really big war with Iran or Russia and China, that we, the American people, will forget all about the corruption and the lies and the deception and Wall Street bailouts. We'll forget about all of that stuff, all of that abuse, and we'll salute and we will line up behind the flag and march our children off to die in these wars. And maybe in the 1950s and 1960s that would have worked. But the real problem that is going to doom our nation, if we, the American people, do not stand up, is that people who are in government, like Anthony Weiner and Sarah Palin, they can't admit to themselves they're morons and they've made bad decisions for the country. They will never admit it to themselves. Remember the history of World War II in Germany. Long past the point where any sane, rational human being in Germany would have said, it's over, we surrender, let's salvage what we can to move forward with. And Hitler kept fighting that war, and finally at the end was blowing up Germany's food and medical supplies to punish his own people for letting them down. Because he couldn't admit to himself he was wrong. And we have the same problem in Washington, D.C. and in Wall Street. They can't admit the whole Federal Reserve was a pyramid scheme. They can't admit their mortgage-backed security fraud was the cause of the crash. They can't admit that we are not able to win these wars that we're stuck in. And they're just going to keep pushing and pushing and pushing until we lose, or the government collapses, or the American people stand up and say, we've really had enough of this nonsense. This nation must change course to be saved. But our government and our financial system cannot change course without admitting the course they chose to be on was wrong. And that is the trap they're in. We are doomed by the ego of those who are in control of our money and political systems. They will never admit they were wrong. They cannot admit that they're wrong. These are egomaniacs. They have to be right. No matter how many other people have to be made to be wrong, they have to be right, even if it takes the entire nation down to destruction, because it's a lot easier to throw other people's money and children into these pointless wars than look in a mirror and say, you know, I might have just messed this up a little bit. We've seen this happen before, where nations that could have avoided destruction ran right on into it because their leaders would never, ever admit to themselves that they had made mistakes. And that's where we are right now. And so as we look at the kind of people who seem to be drawn to political and monetary power in this country, whether it's the Bernie Madoffs or the Dominique Strauss-Kahns or the Anthony Weiners or the Sarah Palins, well, you need to understand that the biggest threat to the nation isn't their stupidity, isn't their lack of morals, it's their own ego and self-image. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to go right to the phones. We're going to go to Clarence in Oklahoma. Osseo Clarence, welcome to the show. What is on your mind today?
Well, I'll tell you what. I really liked your opening exposition there about Sarah Palin's expertise on American history. And I just wanted to say, I used to tell people I work with, I try to keep up. I don't consider myself an expert, but it's always been something that fascinates me. William Dawes, for information, he completed his ride. Paul Rivero did not. He was stopped at the British checkpoint.
That's right.
And they held him. But they didn't know, the British troops there didn't know what was going on. They held him for a little bit, then let him go. But
you know why they got him?
The other guy they completed theirs.
The reason the British got Paul Revere is he stopped to eat a lunch. Not quite the image of,
that makes sense. But another thing that's probably a popular misconception that's in the war, I was reading a couple of historians, and they said, of course, I guess Longfellow or whoever wrote the poem or whatever, but they probably weren't yelling two arms, the British are coming, because at that point in time, the colonists considered themselves to still be British subjects.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it'd be like if we were having that thing here and we'd say two arms, the Americans are coming. And that's not what you'd say. They probably said something, according to this guy's speculation, like the regulars are coming, or the army's coming, or whatever.
Yeah, that would be much more appropriate. That would be much more appropriate.
It makes more sense. And another little deal about Billy Dawes, as they call him. I caught this on the History Channel. They did that Gettysburg or Civil War week and the Gettysburg documentary. The troops there, one of the commanders of the Union forces, I forget his first name. His last name was Dawes, but Billy Dawes was his great-grandfather, and he was like a colonel or whatever, commanding his troops there. And okay, enough of that. Now let's go back to what you were speaking of before the commercial break. I consider America today, from what I've seen and from what conclusions I could draw, is a hollow empire, just like ancient Rome before they fell.
Absolutely.
And very similar to the Soviet Union before they fell.
Yes.
The Soviet Union was a hollow empire. They spent all that money on arms and armaments, and that made them a superpower, but they didn't have the economy to back it up.
That's exactly
right. They didn't. That's what caused them to collapse. And, of course, they say now Ronald Reagan's, they want to beatify him or whatever. Say, well, if it hadn't been for that huge defense build-up back in the 80s, and believe me, I know, I was working for the DOD back then. And my sister got hired on back then during Reagan's big deal because they were just hiring people right and left.
They were throwing the money out like crazy, you know.
Oh, God, they were just throwing money at it, and they said, oh, well, Ronnie Reagan, he broke the Russians, you know. Well, what they don't understand is that very same spending is going on today for wars that we can't afford, and it's getting ready to break us, too. It's like committing mutual suicide.
We're already broken. We're already broken. Look around the country. You know, we're just waiting for a place for the body to fall down.
Exactly. I drive down roads, streets in my town here, in my little suburb, that would do a third world nation proud. I mean, they're patching the patches on the damn roads.
Same here. We've got a main drag at the bottom of Clarence. We've got a main drag at the bottom of the hill, Moanalua Boulevard. It is so rough, and we're in an Xterra, which is supposed to be able to handle rough roads. And my wife is still, you know, her back is hurting from just going over that road. Somebody did a study and said the average Hawaiian driver will pay an additional $600 every year in repairs to their car simply from the poor condition of the roads out here. But, of course, we got plenty of tax money to buy rubber gloves to shove down the front of your pants at the airports.
Yeah, unfortunately. But, yeah, that's basically the point I wanted to make. And it's just, you know, I'm here. I'm watching the show go by, you know. I don't have a whole lot more to go on this little coil, fortunately. Because I really don't want to be here when the denouement comes, or how you say that.
The denouement. A lot of people are like that.
Yeah, when the whole thing, you know, wraps up, you know.
Comes apart. We just had some very good friends of ours who've lived next to us for a couple of years. They came here from Germany because they thought the United States was still the country they saw in all those movies and TV shows, and they were here for 2 years, and they finally said, this is not it. The United States we thought was here doesn't exist. And they're heading back to Germany right now. Another friend of mine when he was young, was living under the Franco fascist dictatorship. And he's trying to tell his friends now, I see the signs everywhere of what is the country. And there's still too many Americans who are in denial. They want to go on thinking that as long as, you know, they go to church and pray and throw their money at whoever the government says to throw money at, that everything will be fine. And it won't. Very clearly, the situation cannot endure much longer.
Absolutely, and that's the American people, like I say, it's past time, and I'm afraid that I fear if they ever wake up, it will be too late. And it may be
well, you know, I'll tell you where the problem is. And Clarence, thank you for the call. We're going to let you go right here. The problem is that those Americans who allowed themselves to be seduced past that line of saying torture was cool, they, like the leadership in Washington, D.C. and Wall Street, are never, ever going to be able to admit to themselves that they were wrong. And they're going to become the burnout cases where they're going to spend the rest of their life wandering around and saying, yes, we were right, and it was those gosh darn Muslims who brought us down, or the anti-Semites brought us down, or whatnot. And you saw burnout cases like that, even in Germany after World War II, people running around, still trying to say we were right to do what we did, and it was the rest of the world's fault. Or like Israel's always running around and saying we're right to do what we're doing to the Palestinian, it's the rest of the world that's wrong. When people get into this fanatic belief in their own ascendancy, and they reach that point where either because of their vanity and ego or simply because they cannot face the guilt of what they've already done, they're not able to look back at their own choices for the country and honestly, objectively evaluate them. That's when the nation is ruined, because effectively you're running without any kind of guidance. There's no moral guidance. There's no practical guidance. It's everybody just putting stuff in their pocket and hoping it'll all work out in the end. And, of course, no nation ever ran itself except downhill. We're going to go to Clint in Las Vegas. Aloha, Clint. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, how are you today?
I'm biodegradable. What's on your mind?
I'm just glad to hear you're still on the air. I had to change the phone number on you. Kudos to the last caller, but I just wanted to say that I wanted to, kudos to you to bring up the inside job. It taught me a lot of how things are going. Now, I'm a pipe fitter, instrumentation tech, union guy, and we was told that we were going to be in the biggest boom. This back in 2007. We'd be in the biggest industrial boom since World War II, and obviously that hasn't panned out. And as a result, I'm a couple months behind on my house payment. But thanks to that video, I've learned an awful lot.
Clint, we got to take a break. Clint, we got to take a break. Hold that thought. I'm going to come back to you right after these words from our sponsors.
We will not go down in the night without a fight. You can burn up our mosques and our homes and our schools, but our spirit will never die. We will not go down in Gaza tonight.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Clint in Las Vegas. And Clint, can you sort of pick up where you left off, where you're feeling the economic hard times the way we pretty much all are?
Yeah, you betcha, Mike. Like I say, I'm only a couple months behind on my. I'm not going to name the mortgage company, GMAC, and But from what I learned just on the video you presented, Inside Job, and I'm into those kind of videos, if you learn what they're doing and you confront these people, and all I asked these guys was to take 6 months, and now my mortgage is well over half paid off, and if you take, all I asked them was to take 6 months, put it on the end of the loan, okay, because of these projects that are getting ready to go, and and everything will be fine. You guys will make money on compound interest, and I'll get to keep my house and get it through you guys' head. I'm not leaving, and even if you throw me out, I'm going to squatter my house, and you couldn't sell it even if you wanted to because there's for sale signs all around the neighborhood, and these guys really back off. If you know what you're talking about, and I don't know how many listeners you have, if you're willing to fight these guys, they will back down, and you just keep calling them and let them know. And when we push, we win.
That's exactly right. When we push, we win, and that's a lesson that needs to go out there. And I think one of the reasons why both the bankers and the government are starting to tread very, very carefully among the people is they saw what happened in Egypt, what happened in Iceland, and you and I and everybody listening to this show, we already owe a tremendous debt of gratitude both to the people of Iceland and the people of Egypt, because that sent a warning message to our own government and our bankers that there is a limit to how much we can be pushed.
Yeah, absolutely. And we don't owe this debt. It's a fake debt. It's a paper debt made out of nothing. And
money junkies will not let go. They cannot admit the decisions they made or the system that they support is wrong. And as a result, we continue edging toward that abyss. And when it actually happens, when it all comes apart, you know, the people in Washington, D.C. and the bankers are going to be scratching their heads and saying, wow, how did that happen and how come nobody saw it coming? Well, we see it coming because we're not, our ego and our personality and our self-worth is not invested in the perpetuation of this pyramid scheme.
Yeah, you, Jeff Rentz, Alex Jones, you guys saw this crash coming years ago, but I just want to say, as long, you know, I'm delighted. I'm delighted to hear you're still on the air. I heard you was going off the air a month ago. I'm just, but I just want all the listeners to know: just educate yourself and confront these guys. They will back down if you force them to. And with that, Mike, I'm going to let you go and listen to the rest of your program. And man, I love you, man.
Thanks an awful lot for the phone call. And you're right. When you stand up and fight for your rights, the bad guys will back down. And the reason is very simple. There are 300 million angry Americans against a few 100,000 in the federal government. And nobody's really sure which side the Army is going to come down on, because the government has been messing with the Army people. And, the bankers were taking their homes preferentially. So not much loyalty there in Washington, D.C. and Wall Street, and therefore they cannot expect much of it back. Going to go to Ben in Nebraska. Aloha, Ben. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi. I was just actually listening to what you were talking about, and it's mystifying to me that we don't have a Spain or an Egypt or a Greece right now. I mean, it's absolutely stunning to me. I mean, yeah, you are absolutely right. 300 million against a few 100,000, maybe, give or take. I mean, and you would think that if, as you say, they were angry, I mean, you'd think we would have had an uprising a long time ago. And just, and you've mentioned in the past, sodium fluoride, stuff like that, but it's just, I'm stunned, Mike.
Well, it is. It's part psychological entrapment. It's part the schools telling you this is the way it's supposed to be, and it's the church saying this is God's will, and it's a sum total of all these different propaganda devices. But remember, 99% of the antebellum slaves were held in their bondage by the belief that was the way the world was supposed to be. Same thing with the medieval serfs who were living under the lie of divine right. It's all a con game. It's all a swindle, and at some point people wake up. They lose their fear, and that's when change starts to happen. And as far as the sodium fluoride issue is concerned, the U.S. government is getting so scared of its own people right now, they're talking about putting lithium in the drinking water. Lithium is what you give to psychotics to keep them from psychoticizing. And they're talking about putting it in the tap water here in the United States.
Amazing. Utterly amazing, And, it's just, and where I live, I've seen a few isolated gatherings, protest type of stuff, but it always seems to be about, marijuana legalization and, just kind of like these little isolated issues, and it's like people don't really see the big picture yet,
Well, people are unhappy. What they're grabbing at are things they can protest about that are not personally threatening. We can go out and we can get angry about killing the whales or slaughtering the baby seals or deadbeat dads or something that's happening on the other side of the world. It takes courage to stand up and say to the government, you guys are messing up the country, because very often the government responds rather emotionally and occasionally violently, like we saw at Kent State. And so Americans are unhappy and they're angry, but they're looking for some way they can express their outrage in a way that does not bring a risk of danger to their personal selves. And so they sublimate. That's what the word is. They sublimate onto issues that, it's like I was watching the TV the other day from one of these fundraisers for animals. The United States, Save the Cuddly Furry Creatures, whatever, and they have this actress come on, and they show all these pitiful-looking animals and, send in your money to take care of them. And it's a diversion, because we're all very angry and upset about what the U.S. government is doing to human children, not only in this country with all the homeless problem, but dropping bombs and drones and all the rest of that in all these war zones where we're blowing little kids to bloody bits. And we want to express our anger at all these dead children, but we really can't because most people are still afraid to stand up to the government. So they put on these commercials and people write a check to take care of abandoned kittens and abandoned dogs. Then they feel better because at least they did something without having to risk their own health and safety in the face of flamethrowers held by the government. And that's all part of that psychological manipulation to keep you in your place.
Yeah, I've heard that described as telescopic philanthropy.
That's a good phrase for it. I love that.
There. Yeah, exactly. It's just mystifying. But anyhow, good to hear you're on a new network, and aloha for now.
Thank you very much for that. I remember back in the 1990s when I was just getting started in this activism, and I fell into it completely by accident over the death of White House Deputy Counsel Vincent Foster, which was sold to America as a suicide. And the first time they had a picture on the news about the suicide gun, I knew it was a fake. That was my business at the time. I worked in motion picture visual effects. And I looked at the picture and I said, this is staged. This is a fake. There's no way this is real. And I started getting in and looking at that. And I remember at the time going around to all my friends in Hollywood and saying, there's been a murder in the White House. And nobody wanted to go near it. And I remember looking at all of my friends in Hollywood who were involved in all these causes like Save the Seals and Save the Bees and Save the Snails and Save all the rest of them. I said, we've got a government that is in fact selling drugs to our kids in the street. Don't you want to do something about it? Oh, no, I can't go up against them. I'm too busy, bashing on the deadbeat dads. And, Hollywood celebrities love to go out and make themselves look good on causes that really carry no personal risk. But with the rare exception of people like Charlie Sheen, I'm trying to think of some of the others who were out there, Rosie O'Donnell, and people like that, who are willing to go out and actually deal with some of these issues that threaten our very way of life. Most people in Hollywood, they want to find something that they can be really seen fighting for, but it doesn't carry a personal risk to them. Yes, let's go out and keep the Japanese from killing whales. Oh, isn't that adventurous and all the rest of it? Yeah, that's a nice thing to do. But shouldn't we be taking care of people who are starving to death or being blown to bloody bits because of the policies of the U.S. government? Oh, no, we can't do that. We can't do that. That's unpatriotic, or that's anti-Semitic, or whatever. And it's a dodge. Unfortunately, far from being the land of the free and home of the brave, most Americans really aren't that brave. And until we fix that, we're not going to be free. We'll be right back after the news break. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I want to talk a little bit about this situation that erupted over the weekend when Adam Gadon, the American Al-Qaeda, issued a new videotape, which, as usual, was simply played all over the American corporate media without question. And in this video, Adam Gadon, the American Al-Qaeda, registered trademark, exhorted American Muslims to start buying guns and to go out and kill people. Ooh, horror of horrors! Those gosh darn Muslims, how could they do something like that? Well, the reality is they didn't, because Adam Gadon is a phony. He's a fake. We've talked about this many, many, many times before, and I find it impossible to believe that the corporate media that are playing Adam Gadon's videos do not already know that his name is really Adam Perlman, and he's the grandson of a member of the board of directors of the Anti-Defamation League. But the media will play these videotapes without argument in order to go on out there and say, yes, Muslims are buying guns and they're getting ready to kill you. And it seems to dovetail rather conveniently with President Barack Obama's very quiet, hopefully you will not notice, anti-gun agenda. Liberals, by and large, think guns are bad. They think guns will kill people. I know for a fact that does not happen, because for the last 17 years now that I have been running this website, I have been conducting an experiment. In my bedroom, I have a Civil War black powder revolver, right in full view, with freedom to do whatever it wants, and it has not moved in 17 years. It has not leapt onto the bed to savage me or my wife. It certainly has not shot us. It has not moved one iota. I'll move it to dust it. That's basically it. Guns don't kill. Cops do. Sometimes with guns and sometimes with tasers. But we know the real agenda here. An armed populace is a free populace. Adolf Hitler said, the first thing you do, you take away their guns, then they'll do what you tell them to do. And so both parties, Republican and Democrat, have a desire to disarm the American people, or at least to weaken them compared to the military. And so we've been watching Obama's sort of trying to put more and more restrictions on guns. And just in time to support that agenda, we have Adam Gadon, the American Al-Qaeda, whose real name is Adam Perlman, is out there with this very provocative videotape saying Muslims should buy guns and start shooting people. And it's just more of that same dodge of creating a crisis. Oh, Muslims with guns. We've got to take guns away from everybody because we don't dare risk letting the Muslims get guns. And it's just more of that same kind of brainwashing to convince you that there's a problem that can be solved only by doing what the government wants you to do, which is to surrender your guns and ammunition, and your high-capacity magazines, and your semi-automatic rifles. And the excuse is, well, you don't need those sorts of guns. I mean, you've got target guns, and you've got hunting rifles. That's really all that you need. That's really all the Second Amendment says you're supposed to have. And that, of course, is a lie, because the Second Amendment doesn't talk about hunting, and it doesn't talk about target shooting. Hunting to feed your family was so much a given when the Constitution was written, it wasn't felt it needed to be mentioned. But the Second Amendment talks about security of a free state, and it talks about a militia. The arms reserved to the people by the Second Amendment are not hunting weapons and not target weapons. They're military weapons equal to those held by the government itself in order to hold abusive government in check. Go back and read the writings of Thomas Jefferson. He wrote many, many times on the meaning of the Second Amendment. It's to make sure that the people reserved as a final resort the ability to defend itself against oppressive government. Remember, the Founding Fathers had, as one of our earlier callers was saying, you know, at the time of the American Revolution, everybody considered themselves to be British. Paul Revere didn't say the British are coming, the British are coming. He said the regulars are coming. The people living in North America were defending themselves against their own government. And after it was all over, the Founding Fathers said, we're going to make sure that the people of the United States of America always retain the means to hold bad government in check, because the Founding Fathers understood that power attracts the very sort of people who shouldn't have it, which is where you get the Sarah Palins and the Anthony Weiners and the Bill Clintons and the George W. Bushes, who really are not qualified to lead this nation to prosperity. They're just qualified, you know, to make themselves prosperous at the expense of everybody else. And so the Founding Fathers wanted to make sure, understanding human nature being what it is, understanding that all governments left free to themselves will evolve towards oligarchy, the Founding Fathers wanted to make sure that you retained the ability to basically get rid of an annoying government. And that's what that's all about. And government obviously wants to remove that. Every single genocide of the 20th century was preceded by a gun ban. You can't have genocides and slavery when the target population is able to shoot you. So the Second Amendment is about keeping the American people with military arms equal to those of the government itself. All righty, I want to move along here and talk a little bit about Fukushima because that's it. Okay, are we back in? Okay, we're back in here. All right, so we're talking about the Fukushima power station over there in Japan and the announcement that as of today, the ruins of reactor number 1 are more radioactive than they have been since the beginning of the disaster. The situation is getting worse. It is not getting better. They're talking about 4 million microsieverts per hour, or 4 sieverts, which doesn't sound quite as dangerous. But 6 microsieverts per hour is 6 sieverts is a lethal dose. So basically, if you are standing near this building for more than an hour and a half, you are dead. You are cooked. You are toast. They're going to have to bury you in a lead coffin. That's how bad the situation is over there. Now, Japan's National Institute or Nuclear Institute of Safety is now admitting that the initial reports of radioactive leakage and fallout were wrong. And they're now saying that they're guessing that the actual radioactivity release was double what they originally were reporting. Now, I remember for the first few days after the disaster at Fukushima, and there was a report about a huge, incredible amounts of radiation pouring out of the ruins of those reactors. And it was retracted, and they came back and said, "Oh, we made a mistake. That it really isn't that radioactive. There was a bad calculation or a bad something or other in the conversion table, and it wasn't all that bad." And now here we are, all these days later, 3 months basically, and they're saying, "Yeah, it actually was that radioactive back then, but we didn't want to work from us and everything." And the important lesson here is, all 3 reactors, 1, 2, and 3, melted down. They breached the pressure vessels, which is the actual reactor core, and they breached containment, all within hours of the earthquake. It happened right there on that first day. And from that day until just about last week, all we got from Japan, from TEPCO, from the U.S. government, from Jim Cramer, from Ann Coulter, was, "Don't worry about it. It's nothing a problem. You know, it's going to be okay. No radioactivity. Radioactivity is good for you. It's not going to be Chernobyl." We were being lied to continuously. They're not managing the disaster. That's the difference. They can't fix the problem. They're just going to manage you to keep you from getting angry and upset at General Electric and the nuclear power industry as a whole. Somebody wrote in and said, "By the way, obviously the myth of Japanese perfection is now destroyed." I said, my Xterra already proved that. But again, it goes back to the reactor designs by General Electric. 3 of General Electric's top scientists quit rather than approve the design. So that's the root cause. And, of course, Stuxnet may have been a factor. We'll be right back after these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. So we're talking about the situation with Fukushima, and we're talking about a situation where the U.S. government and the corporate media cannot handle this crisis. They can't do anything about it. So they're engaged in a program of managing you to keep you from getting upset, to keep you from worrying about it. Most of all, to keep you from thinking that maybe you shouldn't be buying and eating Pacific seafood. Because we have had so many whammies against the food supply of our nation and of planet Earth. We have the Gulf of Mexico oil disaster that poisoned all of those waters. We have the flooding of America's breadbasket, the Great Plains farmlands flooded because and these farm fields have been flooded with toxic industrial waste that is going to take a decade before it degrades and is washed away by rain, and the farm can be used to grow healthy food again. In the show. And now we have Fukushima pouring radioactivity into the air and the water of the Pacific Ocean. And they're admitting the situation was dire. But they just didn't want to tell you because you might get upset. You might get upset with General Electric that designed faulty reactors and built them, even though their own scientists were saying this is not a good idea. And with the recklessness of building these reactors along a coastline in a known high-risk seismic area, and then not putting the emergency generators and other equipment up on a hill in case a tsunami did come across the top of the tsunami wall. Now, they're beginning to be a little bit more honest and forthright about the disaster here, and they're admitting now that plutonium is being found outside the grounds of the Fukushima power plant. Remember they said anywhere? Well, they're finding the debris out there. They're finding plutonium-239 and 240, and again they're saying, the amounts are so small they're not going to pose a hazard. Actually, they will. If you inhale or ingest a particle of plutonium that is so small you can't even see it, then it's an engraved invitation to cancer, and that's the part they're not telling you. It isn't radioactivity that's the problem, it's the contamination. Because once you have this in your body cannot get rid of it. Your body has not evolved to the point of being able to rid itself of radioactive isotopes. They are finding plutonium-239 and 240 outside the reactor power plant grounds. Plutonium-240 has a half-life of 6,563 years. Plutonium-239 has a half-life of 24,100 years. What do we mean by half-life? It means after that period of time, half of the radioactivity material will still be there. It takes 6,500 years for a given mass of plutonium-240 for half of that mass to decay. Then it will take another 6,500 years for half of the remainder to decay. It's a complex curve. It's not linear. Now, the media loves to focus on iodine-131. Ooh, get your iodine pills, iodine-131. And the reason they do that is iodine-131 has a half-life of only 8 days. So they're focusing on the isotope that they can report a week from now has gone away, pretty much. There's only half as much now as there was a week ago. Huzzah, huzzah, go back to breeding us soldiers and paying your taxes because the problem has gone away. No, it hasn't, because iodine is not the only problem. And now that they're admitting that there were meltdowns and pressure vessel ruptures and containment ruptures, I want to go back to a comment I made. Remember when the video came out of reactor number 3 and that huge explosion that went up into the air? And TEPCO and Japan and the American media all said, oh, it's just a hydrogen explosion. Hydrogen will build up in the top of the reactor and it will blow off. So that's just hydrogen that did the explosion. And at the time I said there are two problems with that. When hydrogen burns, it burns with a clear blue, almost impossible to see flame. When you look at the destruction of the Hindenburg, most of what you see on that film is not the hydrogen burning, but the aluminum and iron oxide primer on the outer envelope. That burns with a brilliant yellow, hot white flame. But the hydrogen itself burns very clear blue. And it produces water vapor as its combustion product, which should be white because it's basically steam. And yet the smoke that we saw coming out of the ruined reactor was yellow-brown, not white. And I pointed out at the time, almost 3 months ago, that the color of the smoke coming out of that explosion on Reactor 3 was the same color as the quadrivalent form of plutonium oxide. And now they're admitting that, yeah, the reactors had burned through, there was rupture in whatever, there's plutonium all over the grounds. And the lesson here is that when the government and the media are unable to deal with a real crisis, and they very rarely are, they turn around and they start managing you. They keep you calm, they keep you distracted, they keep you thinking about other things, rather than the real disasters that are affecting your life. Now, Japanese government documents have been released which basically said Japan's emergency response office was almost dysfunctional at the time of the nuclear accident. They had just been sitting around doing nothing for so long and really weren't being all that attentive, and it just took them days to even get up to where they could run as an emergency office. It's kind of like the SEC here in Bernie Madoff. Since then, we found out that the Environmental Protection Agency's automated radiation monitoring system was mostly out of calibration, and large sections of it weren't working at all. Nobody was prepared for this, because all the budgets had been cut because the money had to go to war and Wall Street and Israel. When they have a real disaster like Fukushima or the Gulf oil disaster, they can't deal with it. The only crises the U.S. government and media can deal with are the ones they create to scare you into doing what they want you to do. We'll be right back after these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. The phone lines are open, 877-342-6673, 877-342-6673. I want to skip on over to Europe and the E. coli outbreak. Now, E. coli is normally a very benign bacteria that you automatically have inside your digestive tract. In fact, you really have a great deal of trouble digesting your food without it. But it can have variants that cause ill effects, and these are the E. coli's that you will hear about certain outbreaks, on food, and obviously the situation we have over there in Europe. The fingers are being pointed left and right. Everybody's trying to air their own particular theory about what's going on. The theory that makes the most sense to me is that this E. coli is a spontaneous hybrid that appeared in a farm somewhere where they're just dosing the animals with lots and lots of antibiotics, which is why it gets its antibiotic resistance. And we do know that viruses carrying small snippets of DNA, prions, whatever you want to call them, can take genetic material from one life form and pass it to another. That is how naturally occurring human swine flus can occur. We also know that U.S. government weapons labs do these things artificially. We know they've been trying to weaponize E. coli going back to 1986. So there's all kinds of different possibilities going on out here. I don't think this is a deliberate biological weapon because of the very few number of people that it has killed. And even, as bad as it is, it has not really incapacitated a serious percentage of the German population. So as a biological weapon, it's really kind of a failure. It might be, if it was deliberate, it might be an economic weapon. Because remember, you have all over the European Union, you have countries that are thinking about leaving the Union, like Germany, and going on their own, and all of a sudden, and countries that are saying, I don't want to be part of the IMF anymore. And now all of a sudden their produce exports are destroyed. Nobody wants to buy sprouts from or cucumbers from, these various countries. And so they're plunging back into debt. And the IMF comes in and says, don't you worry, I got plenty of money to loan you. Just sign this austerity agreement to impoverish your own people, and we'll make everything all right again. Now, economic sabotage is not a new thing. It's not a new thing at all. In fact, during the heyday of the Central Intelligence Agency down in South America, it was not at all uncommon after American banks had made loans to these South American governments for the CIA to go in and engage in crop sabotage so that these governments couldn't pay back their loan and were therefore all of a sudden under the control of the bankers. The CIA was using the banking system as a covert form of foreign policy projection. So that may be one thing that's going on. One interesting aspect, though, almost immediately as soon as the E. coli appeared, the large commercial factories and supermarket chains started pointing the fingers at organic farmers. There's this battle going on between people who want to grow food the way it's always been grown before versus the big corporations that want to modify the genes and pump it full of chemicals and just kind of mess around with Mother Nature willy-nilly. And they were pointing fingers and saying, it's those organic farmers. They are the source of the E. coli. Well, the tests have come back from the farm that was accused of being the source of the E. coli. They are clean. It did not come from the organic farmers. But everybody's trying to milk this thing for whatever advantage they can for their own particular agenda. It is a sad and sickening hallmark of the present world that every time something happens, people are not thinking about getting at the truth. They're not thinking about how to fix it. They're not thinking about how to make the world better. It's how can I use this to serve my own agenda, to make the people who sign my public relations paycheck that much happier with me. And it is a continuous distortion of reality and the truth. And again, Shouldn't the agenda be making the world a better place for all rather than carving off a larger chunk of the carcass for they whom I work for who may not be named? We're going to go to the phones. Scott in Wisconsin. Aloha, Scott. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael, you know what, brother? Every time I turn away a week or so, you end up in a different place. But
no, I've been sitting in this chair for 4 years now.
Well, I know, brother, but I was listening to RBN, and I go, what in the heck happened to my brother again? But anyway,
well, what?
I just wanted to
call me the prodigal newscaster.
Yeah, well, are these archives free to listen to?
Yeah, actually, if you go to the What Really Happened website, over on the right-hand side, Rance is making each day's show available for free for 24 hours, which is,
awesome.
You know, I think that's very awesome because we've got a global audience and people can't tune in to the new time, especially, you know, places like Europe. So, you know, they're definitely there, and I understand they're getting a lot of traffic.
Right. Michael, I don't want to get you off topic, but I wanted to know, I was hearing through the grapevines about a QE3. And I think Mr. Puppet Bernanke is going to come out with a QE3 here soon. And what we got to understand, as we go farther in debt, and he pumps this in, it's going to burn up faster because there's no bottom, legitimate, solid bottom for it. And I just wanted to ask you, have you heard anything about a QE3 popping up soon here? And I'm glad to hear you, brother. And you know what, Michael, you're a fighter, and I love you, brother, and that's all I got to say.
Well, thank you very much for that. And yes, at this point, I think there's going to be a QE3. They're on a path they can't stop. It's like when you start running down a hill and you run faster and faster, and then all of a sudden you're running so fast you're using all your energy just to keep from falling, and you can't slow down and stop. It's kind of the same thing that we've got going right here. The only way that can keep the game going is to keep those printing presses running. All these other countries are getting out of the dollar. China apparently has dumped something like 97% of their short-term treasuries. And apparently the Federal Reserve just printed up the paper money to buy it all back to keep it from going out on the world market and depress the dollar even further. And they're trying to conceal the scale of the inflation. They're trying to find cash sinks, which is basically Wall Street, to put the money in so that it doesn't look like there's inflationary pressures. But we're seeing it every day at the gas stations and the food stores. It's starting to happen. We're heading into that hyperinflationary period like we saw in Weimar Republic, Germany, where it took an entire, basket full of currency to buy a loaf of bread. We're heading into that. And from the people who own those printing presses and can put the money in their own pocket as it comes off the printing press, that's all fine and dandy. But for the rest of us, we're looking at a very, very terrible time. And the longer we sit and don't do anything about it, the worse it will be. So, anyway, getting on back here to the Gulf oil spill. As you know, as of next month, it will have been a year since Barack Obama waved his magic wand and declared the oil crisis to be over, and went down there to Florida with his daughter and went swimming in water that was kind of sort of maybe close to the Gulf of Mexico but not actually in it, in order to prove to the rest of America that the Gulf of Mexico was safe to swim in and eat food from. It didn't work. The Gulf fishing industry is still very much in the Al-Qaeda, and medical problems continue to plague everybody living along those coastlines. So it's just an absolute ugly, ugly mess. And basically, Congressman Darrell Issa has come out and taken President Obama to task for his non-handling of the Gulf oil disaster. We've got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're talking about the Gulf oil disaster of slightly more than a year ago. And British Petroleum has pretty much shut down all of their regional offices where they were going to come in and take care of everybody who was hurt by the blowout on the Deepwater Horizon drilling platform. And basically the end result here is that British Petroleum did not keep their promises that they made that they were going to do to clean up the mess in the Gulf of Mexico and to make restitution to those people whose businesses or health were damaged by the disaster. And obviously, the fact that British Petroleum got away with this is, again, an indictment of the executive branch, which is supposed to be running the country for the benefit of Americans, because they sat there and basically allowed British Petroleum, who's a huge donor to President Obama's political campaigns, I might add, to take a walk. Basically, so, well, we're sorry, we did make the oil sink out of sight so you can pretend the Gulf of Mexico is just like it was before. What's amazing is that scientists who were actually being funded by British Petroleum are now coming out and saying that, yeah, the Corexit dispersant actually made things worse. It may have looked like the problem was better because the oil was down out of sight, but it's down there on the bottom of the Gulf where the crabs and other bottom feeders are feeding, and it gets into the food cycle, and it's turning up in the ocean life. And people are pointedly avoiding seafood from the Gulf of Mexico, just as they're starting to do from the Pacific. And in the end, it is the failure of the government and media to keep us informed that is the cause of most of the runaway speculation as to what's happening. Because when the government sits there and says, oh, the Fukushima's not a problem, and the oil well, it's all gone away, it's not a problem, and we know we're being lied to, then we are free to allow our imaginations to run wild to the worst possible scenario. And certainly in the case of Fukushima, the worst possible scenario turned out to be the correct one. So people want to err on the side of caution because they don't want to be eating, let alone feeding their children, seafood that is contaminated with petroleum aromatic hydrocarbons and Corexit dispersants, which destroy cell walls. And they certainly do not want their families to be eating fish that might be contaminated with radioactive particles, which once you ingest them, your body cannot get rid of them. And because we cannot rely on the government to be keeping these things in track for us, because we know the government will happily have us eat oil-soaked and radioactive food because it keeps food companies profitable and paying taxes and making political donations, then of course we're going to err on the side of caution. Of course we're all going to start living our lives on the assumption that the government is lying to us about pretty much everything. Which brings us to cell phones and colony collapse disorder. I was rather dismayed this morning to see a whole new flood of stories all over the corporate media about how cell phones are killing the honeybees. We're talking about colony collapse disorder. We're talking about hives of honeybees that are simply going away, vanishing, ceasing to be. And it is a problem not just for people who like honey, for all the wonderful things that it can do, but because honeybees pollinize much of our food crops. And without the honeybees, artificial pollination is going to be hideously expensive if it works at all. And we're going to see more of our food-producing capability go away. Well, ever since the colony collapse disorder became an issue, we've been seeing finger-pointing, oh, it's this, it's that, it's over there. And cell phones were named as a villain. But we know this cannot be true. Cell phones have been around for about 15 years, and before cell phones came around, those frequencies used by these cell phones were under constant usage going back to the 1940s. Colony collapse has only been a problem for a few years, coinciding with the large-scale commercial exploitation of genetically modified crops. Now, back in 1999, Nature magazine put out a peer-reviewed study that showed pollen from genetically modified corn was killing monarch butterfly larvae. Now, of course, the genetics industry is a huge billion-dollar, too big to fail, too big to touch behemoth. And they launched a huge public relations campaign to say, no, it's all safe, it won't hurt you. But they were not able to disprove the claims. In fact, the last refutation, it wasn't even a refutation, it was a dismissal. The article that was trying to basically counter the Nature article basically said, well, yeah, in a laboratory the pollen does kill the larvae, but we don't really know that applies out in the real world, which is kind of a stupid argument to make. You don't know that it doesn't apply out in the real world until you go out and test it. And nobody wants to test something when they're not going to like the result. The golden rule of science. Whoever's handing out the gold gets to pick the science here. So over this weekend, we had this other story where these scientists in India have identified the exact vector by which pollen from genetically modified crops are toxic to benign insects. And this is another case of attempting to duck responsibility for a major environmental disaster and put the blame onto somebody else in order to go on selling the stuff that's causing the problem. Because look at it. Despite Chernobyl, despite 3 Mile Island, despite Fukushima, General Electric is still out there peddling their reactors. And they're still pushing nuclear power. Despite the Deepwater Horizon accident, they're still drilling in the Gulf of Mexico without using the acoustic shutoff blowout preventers. And despite the growing body of evidence about the dangers of runaway genetically modified mistakes, they're still out there pushing GM crops on everybody. Because it's all about the money and the money junkies. By the way, the World Bank is now calling for a carbon dioxide tax on jet and shipping fuel to be paid to them. And remember what I said, the whole global warming scam, it's merely an excuse for more taxation and a global government. That's what the push is. And now that it's summer, they're back trying it again. In fact, I saw this bizarre article. The people who are pushing this global warming Kool-Aid, they've had 3 harsh winters in a row. They don't know how to counter that. So now it's become a matter of faith in the doctrine. They can't argue the science anymore. They've been caught rigging the data. So now it's all about politics and don't you care about the world. And so there's this article down there that came out of Australia where they're talking about we should take everybody who hates the earth, who denies man's damage to the planet, who denies global warming, and we should forcibly tattoo them so the world knows what kind of scum they are. Folks, we've been down this road about tattooing people who don't agree with the government once before. They were doing it in those Nazi slave labor camps. I don't think we want to go there again. But that betrays the mindset of the carbon Nazis. They're ready to start tattooing you if you don't agree with them. Forcibly. That's literally, they're talking about forcible tattooing of anybody who doesn't agree with them in order to ostracize them, in order to mark them. Oh, you don't want to talk to them. They have a tattoo. They're not credible. They're not respectable. They've got a tattoo that says they don't agree with me. Therefore, you should not listen to them. It's all about global dictatorship and global taxation. We've had 3 harsh winters in a row, record flooding from record snowfall all over North America. One by one, we see all these claims about a warming world and a thinning ice pack turn out to be mistaken or outright lies. And the money junkies can't let go. They've already invested hundreds of millions of dollars in this scam. They can't back off. They can't look in a mirror and admit they were wrong. So they're going to become more and more fanatical, and they're going to become more and more extreme. They're talking about tattooing people who don't agree with them. What will it be next? Death squads? Oh, you put out too much carbon dioxide. You're gone. Meanwhile, as it turns out, taking a closer look at the economy here, U.S. taxpayers are still bailing out the banks. You know, whether you've seen Inside Job, which is the one I recommend, or Too Big to Fail, which is sort of a puff piece, poo polish that HBO is running to death right now, it turns out the U.S. government is still backstopping all of the big banks with taxpayer guarantees. Remember what I said about a fascist economic state? Profits are kept private, but losses are socialized. And every time the banks make a mistake, they take a reckless chance The government comes in and says, we'll just put the losses on the American people. They're such generous souls. They've got plenty of money. They don't mind putting off their kids' college education for another few years to cover the losses. And they did it back in the 1980s during the S&L bailout, and they're doing it now during the greatest depression when we, the American people, are out of money. They're still grabbing the last few pennies from your pocket to prop up the bank so they can go on playing their little gambling games on Wall Street. And Newsweek is admitting Americans are getting angry. But I wish you'd get a little angrier. A little bit angry. Because, to heck with anger management. We're ticked off. We evolved to feel rage and anger for a reason, in order to deal with threats to our own kind. You're supposed to get angry when you are abused. You're supposed to feel rage when you are taken from. You should give in to that. Hate sometimes gets a really bad reputation. It's okay to hate people who do hateful things. I hate liars, and I hate cheats, and I hate child molesters. And if you don't, then you have been crippled somehow in that little brain pan of yours, if you can't feel that kind of rage and anger anymore. You're justified in being angry. You should be angry. You have every right to be angry because you did not do anything to deserve this. It was done to you. They're doing it over in Greece. The austerity protests are growing. They're turning into riots. Remember, when you choose to live on less, that's austerity. When the government forces you to live on less, that is poverty. And that is making people angry. Good for the Greeks, good for the Egyptians, good for the Icelanders. They're making Americans look like pussies. And on that thought, that's it for our show today. We'll be back tomorrow. Until then, stay safe, stay well, stay angry, and aloha, America.